Okay. Good morning, everyone. This is Prof. Kenneth Huang from National University of Singapore. Um, Today we have a special session on for IACMR on how to enhance review quality, right? So David Zhu has a scheduling conflict, so I will be standing in as the chair and also host for today. And also I will moderate the time and so on. Today we have 4 distinguished panelists and of course including myself. So Cecilia Gu, Professor Cecilia Gu is from the School of Business in Georgia State University, and we have Professor Dali Ma from Professor of Management from Drexel University, and we have Professor Milo Wang from Arizona State University. Okay, and myself. So today we'll be conducting the session in English, right? So I had one in Chinese earlier on, and there will be another one in Chinese, but today is English, okay? So this is the format for today's session. So first of each of these panelists, I think we'll go with Cecilia first, and then myself, and then Dali, and then last but not least, Milo. Each of us will talk for about 15 minutes, okay, 15, and then present about, what we think about, how we can improve or enhance the quality for review. And then we will open up, right, the floor for questions, okay? And then we have about 25 minutes or so for question and answers, and then we'll try to answer all your questions, okay, related to review and submission and so on. All right, so I think that would be the sequence for today. Any questions so far? Okay. All right. So if there's no pressing question at this point, without further delay, let me invite first Cecilia to start the presentation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kenneth, and thank you everyone for joining today. My name is Cecilia. I'm from Georgia State University as associate professor. My research interest is in the intersect of global strategy and in entrepreneurship. Currently, I am working on emerging market firm strategies and the performance implications. I am serving as the senior editor for Management and Organization Review, and also the associate editor for Global Strategy Journal. So yeah, I'm happy to be here today and sharing with you some of my thoughts on how to be an excellent reviewer. So I was told to share one of the exemplar review piece with you and sort of go through what I like in the review. And then I'm gonna quickly share one slide that highlights some of the things that I was not able to bring up in that exemplar piece. So I hope that it would take about 10 to 15 minutes. Just keep me in check, Kenneth, in case I go off time. So let me just try to share my exemplar piece here. Are you able to see the Word documents?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so this is one I have received as for one of my papers, which eventually got published in a top journal. So I'm gonna share with you what I like the most as an author, but also if I take the hat on as an editor, why do I like it, right? So, so first thing first, usually we will start our review with a brief summary of what the paper is about, what are the strengths of the paper. And in this particular review, as you can see it here, the reviewer highlights that the paper is creative, well-grounded, and it extends research in so and so. I think this is a very important section such that it helps to highlight the strengths, and some of the papers, they may be very strong in terms of the theory. A theory can be very compelling. In others, it can be the empirical context is very interesting, or they address a very relevant important topic. It's important for the editor to know what is there to like, and also from the author's perspective, it's important for them to have some acknowledgement, knowing that the rest of the paper is going to be critical comments. So the review will be kind of constructive and helpful in a way when it starts with some acknowledgement. So it plays useful to both ends, I think. Moving forward here, the reason why I want to highlight is it's a phrase where it says it is entirely up to you. So as a reviewer, we come in and approach the paper many times with our own theoretical lens or our own preferences or taste. But it's important to keep an open mind at the same time. So being a constructive reviewer to me is not only being able to pinpoint the limitation, but also providing suggestions and then keeping an open mind. And there's that reason why I want to highlight this comment. Moving forward, usually we will see the first 1 or 2 or even 3 comments being focused on theoretical limitations, which very often would be some of the most serious limitations. That's part of the reason why it will come in the first several points. Now, which is fair, right? Almost all the papers you will receive comments like the theoretical contribution is lacking. However, as I highlighted here, I would say a very constructive comment would be those who are able to point out what goes wrong, right? So as you can see it here, the reviewer actually talk about the assumptions, the scope conditions of the theory, what he or she think is reasonable, and what he or she think is a bit less convincing. I think comments like that, which is really thoughtful in thinking about the assumptions, the boundaries, what are the arguments that make sense and what are the arguments that don't, and why, or what are the approaches that help you to identify the underlying mechanisms better, would be very helpful. And that's why I think this is one of the exemplar approach to pointing out theoretical limitations instead of just saying that theoretical limitations and there's not enough contributions. And also, it's important to point out the parts that you agree with. So you kind of set up a good expectations, right? These parts which the reviewer agree with, the authors probably would determine not to make radical changes, other than other parts that the reviewers consider less convincing. And here, going back to what I mentioned just now, if you read this sentence closely, the reviewer says, at the very least, these deserve some discussions and an empirical test confirming your predictive monotonic effects. So these very sentence set the expectations. This is the minimum that the reviewers expect the authors to do. So as the author, they would then moving forward know that at least they will have to conduct some additional empirical tests to confirm the effects that they argue for and the findings are showing. So set the right expectations is important, not only for the authors, but also for the editors. Moving forward into the second page, I would say this highlighted paragraph here, again, the reviewer does not only stop in pointing out the issue. In fact, he has 4 or 5 lines here talk about solutions, right? Some of the useful suggestions to fix the problem. I think that would be very helpful. So as we review, I also encourage us all to not only put on the critical hat, but also think of yourself as one of the co-authors and what would you do to fix a paper for the problems that you highlighted. Moving forward, I think the reason why I want to highlight this is it would be helpful for the editors when reviewers organize their comments in terms of major and minor issue, meaning that they prioritize their comments on the major issues and then leave the minor issues towards the end of the document. This is just my preference, and there are other reviewers that prefer to organize the comment in terms of, say, the order of their appearance in the paper, which is fine too. But as an editor, at least for myself, the former way would be more helpful for my decision, and try to understand what the major issues are and whether these issues deserve another round of revision. Last but not least, it's about the length of the review. Here, you're looking at 2-page 11 font size review. And I would say this is a very healthy length of the review. 1.5 page, 2 and 2.5 would be acceptable. I've known that some colleagues of mine once received a review that is above 10 pages, single space. And it was an invitation for resubmission, but then he and his co-author team decided to give up. And that is just not normal, right? So I would encourage you, when you write the review, budget your length accordingly. And again, try to highlight the major issues with a constructive comments and open mind. With that, let me just stop sharing. And I have about 5 minutes, and let me just share my 1-page slides where I would like to highlight some of the issues that I think would be helpful too. Some of these I haven't got a chance to talk about in the Word document just now. Are you able to let me see.
Yep. Slide.
Yeah, you're able to see it. Yep. Good. Thank you. So first, I think it's important to be comprehensive. Some of these points I have already highlighted. When you go over the manuscript, try to pay attention to all of these aspects like framing, contribution, argument, method, findings, and the overall writing styles, right? The presentations. And separate the major and minor issues, as I mentioned, and identify the strengths or the potential of the paper. Now, when you submit the recommendation or your decision, usually there is a window that is confidential to only to the editor. So that would be a good opportunity for you to write down what you think is the major strengths or what you think would be the major weakness. Sometimes if your decision is on the borderline between major revision or rejection, or between major and minor revision, that would be a good place to jot down your ideas as well. But it's important to be consistent in terms of your tones of your review. If you think it's a rejection and you suggest a rejection to the editor, you may as well be more critical and sort of really pointing out the major issues, frankly, to the reviewer, and likewise, vice versa. Be constructive. So as I said earlier, provide potential remedies for the weakness other than just pinpointing the weakness itself. Also acknowledge your own weakness as well, right? So some of the good reviewers I've seen, they are very open-minded, and they also acknowledge sometimes that if they're not experts in the field, say maybe they're the experts in the theory, but they are not very familiar with the empirical context, or maybe they're very good at the methodology, but they're not very familiar with the topic. So that, again, it's all about managing expectations. When you review for journals, different journals typically have different requirements and expectations. So it would be helpful for you to go through if you're new to the journal or you're just recently invited to join the review board. to go through the recent publications and know what are the expectations of the journal so that you can accordingly adjust yours when you review. Be ethical. It's about, I think, a strong review. It's not about repeating and emphasizing your own work and suggesting a citation of your own, but it's about your quality of the review. I'm not sure about yours, but I've received, as an editor and author myself, reviews that apparently try to emphasize reference and citations of certain people. And as a result of that, maybe they reject the paper. So I don't think that's an ethical way to be a reviewer. And also, if there are conflicting interests involved, say you're the colleagues of the author, you have seen the paper before, just be transparent when you received an invitation. Last but not least is about being responsive. So first of all, please do respond to the invitation emails timely. Usually editors are running with a very tight timeline. So we totally understand that if you have multiple papers to review in your pipeline, or you have a very hectic schedule that won't allow you to do it, but at least let us know timely so that we can move on to find other reviewer. Now, if you're interested in reviewing the paper and you want to do it, but you don't have enough time to finish it by the deadline, it would be really helpful for you to communicate with the editors upfront, right? And even if you did not do that and things happened later on and you were not able to catch the deadline, please do, make sure that you communicate and you respond to emails and explain that you may need another week or two to finish it. So the editors will be able to adjust the schedule accordingly. Last but not least, for some of you who are interested in joining the editorial board or to serve a reviewer for certain journals, no matter what journal it is, always be proactive to write an email to the editor of that journal and recommend yourself with a CV. So I think that would be, at least for myself, I would really appreciate that. And because we always are searching for good reviewers. So with that, let me stop here and decide my 2 cents. I will pass back to Kenneth. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, Professor Cecilia. So excellent. I thought that was excellent sharing. I especially like the 2-page, right, review. I think no more than 2.5, and that will make everyone's job easier. I mean, 2-page can be very focused, right, and very targeted, and also a lot of great advice about how to serve on the editorial board, be a bit proactive. If you have review several papers for a journal, feel free to approach editor and say that you're interested to stay connected, to have a long-term relationship with the journal. How would it be possible, right, to serve on the editorial board? Okay. All right. So so with that, I will then my turn to share. Okay. So let me do my sharing. Okay. Right. All right. Can you see my slides? Good. Yeah. Okay. So again, welcome to the seminar. I just want to, I'm Kenneth Wong from National University of Singapore. I just want to highlight that I'm also the macro track co-chair for the IACMR conference in 2025. So, very much your submissions and of course your help with the review are very much welcome, right? Okay, so I also serve as the deputy editor of Management Organization Review, and also on the editorial board of Academy of Management Journal, Strategic Management Journal, OgScience, and Technological Forecasting and Social Change. Okay, so I will talk about the review quality and give some advice and insights for both from a reviewer's perspective as well as from maybe member of editorial board or even the editor's perspective, right? Okay, so I will just start by a couple of slides. go in the reverse order of what Cecilia did, right? A couple of slides, just sharing some general tips, followed by one or two specific review examples, okay, from my own papers. Okay, so first, this is what I usually do, right, for a review. So I will, receive a review request from an editor, and then I'll do a quick, initial reading through the paper, right? I won't spend too much time on the initial reading, but just to get a sense of the paper's main argument, structure, and content, and then also make a quick note of anything that stands out, right? Everyone does this differently. Some people do it in one go, maybe 3-4 hours, right? Some people do it over 2 days, 3 days. I'll do a quick reading, and then maybe I'll give myself some time, some space, go do some other things, and then come back, right? Either the same day or next day to do a detailed reading, okay, and evaluation of the manuscript, right, that I receive. Right. First, I'll try to, look at the title and the abstract to see if they are clear, right? Do they accurately reflect the content and significance of the study? Look at the introduction. The introduction is usually where the authors spend, a lot of the time, sometimes I heard most of the time for a paper. So introduction is quite critical, right? So look at the introduction. Are the research questions clear? Are there any specific gaps, right, that the authors are trying to address through the study? What about the contributions, right? So how do they add to management, strategy, organization, literature, right? So what are the contributions of this particular paper to your specific domain, right? So these are some of the key things I'll look out for in the introduction. Of course, whether the writing is clear or not. And then goes to the literature review or the theoretical development section, right? Are the literature review comprehensive? Are they up to date? Are they only citing paper from 30 years ago? Hopefully not, right? So there should be some classic papers, seminal papers, plus some more recent work, right, on this topic. Do the authors identify gaps, right, that the research aims to fill, which kind of extend from the introduction section, right? Especially within the context of management and organizational theories, right? And then, usually if it's a deductive kind of study, there's hypothesis, right? So you look at whether the hypotheses are stated clearly and then whether they kind of follow the theoretical argument, right, in the theory or literature review section, okay? Following that, usually it's about methodology, right? So the paper should talk about the research design, data collection effort, data sources, what kind of method they are using. Is it quantitative or is it mixed methods or just, more qualitative interviews, field work and so on. And then, talk about, if it's regression, what kind of regression, what kind of analysis. Are these sound and are these appropriate, right, for the study? Okay, especially for the research question that they pose, are these methods and research design, are they clean, are they suitable to answer these research questions? Okay, and this is usually followed by the results section, right? So are the results clearly presented? Are they logically structured, right? Do they answer the research question? Do they follow, reasonably or logically from the method section? Do they align with the stated hypothesis and objectives, right, to test them effectively? And then, are there any robustness checks, right? Sometimes there are alternative explanations. Sometimes there are, alternative theories or even, alternative hypotheses. Do these robustness checks, test for some of those alternative hypotheses, right? Are there supplementary analysis which, extend the main analysis in the paper? Okay, and then finally, discussion implications, right? Are the results interpreted effectively, accurately, right, in light of the results section, right, in the prior section, and then also in the broader sense, right, what are the implications for theory, what are implications for managerial practices, even for policy. And usually the authors in papers, they tend to highlight a little bit of limitations and future research. Okay, so I think these are some of the things to look out for. I do know sometimes reviewer look at the limitation section and then say that, highlight whether the limitations are in fact the limitation of the study and use that as a critique, right? I tend not to do that too much because the authors acknowledge that limitation. Although, of course, if the limitation is a very critical one, then perhaps as a reviewer, you could highlight that, right? Otherwise, I mean, every study has their limitations, right? So So that's my own take. Okay. And then finally, references, are they up to date? Are they relevant? Are they correctly cited? Usually we don't pay too much attention to references, right? But I actually, in my years of as an author and a reviewer, I do have a reviewer coming and pointing to me and that saying that, oh, hey, some of the references, it should be, in the main paper, it should be phrased this way or that way. So, sometimes reviewers do pay attention to references. Okay, in terms of a bit of a criteria for the review, I think Cecilia has done a great job going through some of the key criteria. So I will be very brief here. Okay, so first, of course, originality and relevance, whether the paper is original, right? Is it novel? Is it, the research question, is it significant, right, in advancing management or organization theory or practice? Of course, this varies a little bit, based on journals. For ISCMR, definitely, theory contribution is important. For some journals, maybe methods or maybe the empirical analysis play a bigger role, right? But I think for most management journal, you need some level of theory contributions, right? Okay, so whether the research is done vigorously, right? And then is there rigor, right? So is it robust, right? The method, is it robust? Are the analysis robust? Are the methods approach suitable? Is the research design clean? Does it take into account of, even some endogeneity issues? Does it make the correct causal inference, right? So these are some of the important things to think about when you think about good research, right? Is it valid, right? Is it internally valid, externally valid? Is it generalizable, right, to other contexts and to other contexts and settings? But sometimes validity, especially generalizability, if the context itself is important enough, right, maybe we don't have to say that it has to generalize to every other context, right? That's quite difficult, right, generally. But in general, I would say, generalizability is one of the criteria, although we can, decide whether, the context itself of the research, right, is already important enough. Right. So, okay, is it written in a clear manner? I think clarity is one of the key issues, right, for writing. If it's not clear, you cannot follow, right? Clarity reflects, right, of writing, reflects clarity of thinking, right? So articulation of complex concepts, theory, and measures, are they written down, clearly? Okay. It's about communication, right, to the reviewers, to the editors, and so on. Okay. Finally, ethics, right? So I think Cecilia also mentioned this. Is there plagiarism, right? Is there potential conflict of interest? Did you see already some papers published on this topic, which are super close, right? So some of this, if you, as a reviewer, if you notice, you can highlight this to the editor. Okay. So please do provide, constructive feedback, right? Specific, detailed, and actionable feedback, right? What if you make a criticism or you make a comment, that's totally fine. But is there anything that you think the author could do, right, to address this particular comment that you made, right? So as much as possible, of course, we understand not everything, will have a clear path forward, right? But I think as much as possible, please do provide specific detail and, actionable feedback that allow the authors to proceed. Okay, so highlight some strengths and weaknesses of the paper, suggestion for improvement, what are some literature to consider, alternative framing, some addition to the theory, things that could enhance the contribution of the paper, maintain a professional, respectful, and developmental tone, right, throughout the review, and then complete the review within agreed upon time frames. It's 4 weeks, it's 5 weeks, it's 6 weeks. And then if you need extension, please do communicate with the editor. So when making recommendation to the editor, in a separate, usually in a confidential comment section, not to be seen by the authors, usually accept minor revision, major revision, or reject. I think Cecilia also mentioned this. So please be consistent in your tone. If your review is very, very critical, and then usually it's the other way around, right? If your review is super positive and then don't tell the editors to say, okay, this paper is really not good, please reject it, right? So then that makes editor's job very difficult, right? So please maintain that kind of consistent tone. Okay, so I'll take okay, so this is a bit of a structure. So of a typical review, I'll take maybe 3 to 4 minutes to go through a couple of examples, right? So typically, you have a summary of finding of the paper, right? 1 or 2 or 3 paragraphs, or 1 or 2 paragraphs. That's fine. A major comment about 6 to 8 points, and then followed by some minor comments, say grammatical errors, unclear sentences, minor inconsistencies, and so on. And some reviewer might prefer, a paragraph or concluding remarks, but that's kind of optional. Okay, so I take from one of my paper just recently published in SMJ, okay, on non-practicing entity litigation on firm innovation strategy. Okay, so this is what the reviewer told us, right? So start out by really nice overview, right, of the full paragraph in this case of what we are trying to do, right, in this paper, right? So the study investigate the effects of NPE on innovation strategies and so on, right? Your H2 does this, your H1 and H2 does that, right? We use a staggered difference in difference analysis. And then the evidence is consistent. There are things to like about the study. Again, positive, constructive tone, right? Topics important and timely, and then paper cover a lot of ground in 39 pages, and so on, right? However, right, the reviewers start to highlight that, even though I kind of like the paper, in general, but I am not convinced about some of the key things, okay? So not yet convinced, right? So then the reviewer goes on to say that, okay, so these are some of the key things I want the authors to do. First, anchor the paper much more substantively in prior literature, then also rethink about some of the fundamental aspects of the empirics, tone down on the claims in light of those work, and then provide more direct evidence, such as, do more interviews, some more quotes, even case studies, and so on, okay? So these are some of the major things the reviewer want us to do. And then main comment one is, of course, on literature. You should use the work from Cohen more, because this is one of the, we did cite, but you say, you should go deeper, right? While you acknowledge prior work, but how these findings should align more with the prior work and so on. Comment number 2, a little bit more on theory side, but also start to move into empirics. For example, say, okay, we use the example of Cisco, right? But then this also give rise to a few questions, right? So first, we should think about the example as shouldn't we expect organizational shift towards more inward as this and that, right? So and then secondly, we're citing a higher share of internal patents, the new invention, do that, right? And especially in the light of Cohen and so on, I don't see how this benefit, right, would, of response will outweigh the potential drain and so on, right? So based on the examples and evidence we presented, the reviewer, ask us to, go deeper into a few things, and then to check some things, and then also ask us to highlight certain things or further investigate some of the critical issues. Okay, again, I think very specific, very constructive, and then the tone is good, right? And then last, comment 3 is all about empirics, right? So you need to, do more in terms of the findings, ruling out alternative explanations, or clarify things that were not clear at the moment. At a minimum, right? Again, at a minimum, right? If you don't do some of those, you should at least tell us more about, the extent which firms are involved in IP lawsuit by non-NPE, right? And so on, right? So again, very clear, very constructive tone. So another example from the AMJ paper in 2019 that we published. So point 1, again, broadly about the theory of the paper, right? So the Chinese government does that, and then so it's pro-innovation policy, and so on. So you should talk about more about this and that, right? So about the general theory comments. And then comment number 2 about the theory, and then comment number 3.3 about the methods, right? So I believe some of the methods can be clarified. First, the measure of patterns, you need to do this and that. You need to better justify theory and empirical support, better align them in this way and that, and then cite, the reviewer cited a couple of papers here for us to read, right? And then also you should explain your estimation approach, right? Better. How is it appropriate for the research design, and how does it best address the question? Is the Poisson model best? He's not saying it's not a good method. He's saying that you should provide more justification. What about checking, alternative model like a negative binomial regression model, right? So again, very clear, very pointed and very constructive comments. And point number 4, general. Okay, so having said, talk about the theory, hypothesis, methods, empirics, let me just give a broad, summary about discussion, right? You should do this and that, offer a nice summary, but and then the reviewer pointed out that this is a relatively minor point. Okay, so not a big deal, but still, good to do. And then finally, a concluding remark. I see, again, positive tone, a number of positive aspects about the paper, but I'm also concerned about the framing and some issue with the theory and empirics. So you should, and then also again reiterate about point 3, point 4, and then point 1. And I hope my comments are helpful. Okay. Of course, in the end, we managed to address all the issues very carefully, so the paper gets published. But again, I really appreciate, right, the reviewer's tone and very specific, actionable comments, and very constructive as well. Okay, so I think with that, thanks very much for listening. Let me stop sharing. Okay. Okay, all right. Thank you. Okay, so now let's invite Professor Dali Ma to talk about his thoughts.
Thanks, Kenneth. Okay. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Let me share with my screen here. Let me see. All right, can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it's not in the presentation mode. Maybe you want to, yeah. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Okay. All right. I want to share some of my experience when I was a reviewer for MOR, as well as I'm the editor, senior editor for MOR. Personally, I have been serving for MOR for some time, and I got the Best Reviewer Award as well as the Best Senior Editor Award in different years. So some of my general suggestions, I think Cecilia and Kenneth already talked about lots of valuable points, and I just don't need to repeat them. And so some of the points I want to mention is the first thing is like Cecilia and Kenneth said, and we would like you to pay attention to details as to, for example, how the author team construct the argumentation, the hypothesis. My own reading of the manuscripts and over the past some years is that sometimes the authors, they tend to have kind of habitual way of developing hypotheses, and they just put those moderating hypotheses together, kind of follow the norm of the literature, but such that I don't see a strong argumentation there. It seems that they present the hypothesis for the sake of presenting them, rather than to really show the story they want to tell, the argument they want to tell. So these things I would like the reviewers to help me pick the details. And also the empirics, and some reviewers I see in the past is a good reviewers could be very, very careful about the empirics. And one of the main issues certainly is about endogenic treatment and how does the author do that. I think that's some question I would like to hear from the reviewers. And sometimes certain methodology I may not be very familiar with, and I would rely more on the reviewer to give me some help in assessing the quality of the work the author or author team do. And sometimes when I pick reviewers, sometimes I pay attention to that. And some reviewers, I know that their work let me feel more confident in their assessment of theory. And sometimes I just wrote in the letter, invitation letter, saying that you can focus on the theory part. And some reviewers, I know that they are very strong in method, and I would say something like, please pay particular attention to the empirical part. So that's and the context, because for example, I have been in the United States for some years, and even though I follow China and I still work on paper about China, but some of the current events in the Chinese context, maybe I'm not that very familiar with, and I would like the reviewers to sometimes help me assess the accuracy of the author's demonstration or portrayal of the Chinese institutional context. Because that's the second point I want to highlight is, I think we need to keep the journal's mission in mind. And MOR, I remember when An Sui started the journal, and we had an email conversation, and she said, I want MOR to be China's ASQ. I think that's years ago. And so in my understanding, I think the journal also has the mission statement. In my understanding, the journal is to use the unique Chinese context or the unique developing context to really advance organization and management theory. So this is something that is, that's why I pay attention to the context part, and because I want the reviewers to help me see the connection between China and the general management theory, either in strategy or in OB or in OT. So that's the second point I want to say. And the third one is, like both of them said, we would like you to be constructive. One is to see the diamond in the rough. And the first submission often has lots of issues. And I would like to, sometimes you may just be impatient. You just think, okay, let's just reject the paper. And that's the easiest solution. But sometimes you may just throw the baby together with the bathwater. And I would like you to really calm down a little bit and be patient a little bit to see whether there is anything that is new, that is worthwhile for us to consider further for the manuscript. Because novelty, to me, is the most important factor in decision-making for all manuscripts. And so that is something that is, especially in the first round, I would really like the reviewer to help me assess that. And also, I would like to see the path forward. Sometimes a paper it is difficult to see how to make it successful. So in my mindset, when I read a manuscript, I assume I want to see the paper succeed. So I would try to find a way to make the paper better, to get it published. But sometimes it is hard, and maybe you would have the same feeling or assessment and then share with me. Basically, it is not just about critique a paper. It is also about how to solve the problem. Sometimes the problem maybe it's impossible to solve it, especially when it comes to the empirical side. Sometimes if a paper has a severe sample selection problem or technical issue, it is very difficult to solve. And sometimes it is a theory part, and it is hard when we read the paper, then maybe we will see that it is hard for the author to really drive the theory forward. And just I would also like to hear from the reviewers on that. And also, I would like to see the reviewers to be more balanced. And I used to have a very accomplished scholar as a reviewer. I asked him to review multiple manuscripts for me. And eventually, I decided that I cannot use him anymore. I trust his scholarship, no problem, but he's just so critical. He's just so critical that I feel that it's just so hard for him to improve the paper. And with that kind of harsh tone, and it makes it very difficult for me to make the decision, because sometimes I think the paper, I see the problem of the paper. I agree some of the issues that he pointed out, but I just don't think the problems are so serious or so fatal that he would just be so harsh. So I would like to be more balanced. That's one extreme. The other extreme is the reviewer is too friendly. Actually, I had a friend and I invited him to review multiple manuscripts for me. And he is very friendly. Honestly, I wish he could be the reviewer for my papers, but it's the problem is if you're too friendly, you don't have much substance in the review. So that is not very helpful for me too, because when I read the paper, I roughly get a sense about, okay, where the paper is. But if you are too friendly in the first round, you just sound like this paper is ready to go through conditional acceptance. I just don't feel that is an accurate assessment of the paper. So either of them, I think I see the issues, and I probably be hesitant to invite them to review more manuscripts for me because it just is not very helpful. And finally, I want to say about a little bit about split reviews. So I would like you to just, for the reviewers, just say whatever you think is based on your expertise. I don't mind to see split reviews. And lots of times I make decisions based on split reviews. I actually don't, in my review experience, editorial experience, probably in the manuscripts I handled, there was only maybe 1 or 2 papers that is really the reviewers had a very strong consensus about, okay, all 3 of them say yes. And usually there are split reviews. And in that case, I'm okay acting on them. And sometimes it's just the reviewers may have different expertise taste. And sometimes good papers, seminal papers, they got to be controversial. And at one time, I talked to my doctoral dissertation advisor, and who used to be the editor of American Journal of Sociology, and he accepted some of the probably most seminal papers, like Granovetter's paper on embeddedness in 1985, and Glenn Carroll's paper on resource partition in ecology. And for all these papers, and he told me that there were always split reviews, and he said that is fine because I think seminal papers should be controversial. So when I read your reviews, I'm okay with split reviews. I pay more attention to the quality of the review and rather than the tone of the review. So you need to tell me some more substance about the reviews, about the paper, so that could help my assessment. Yeah, that's some of the points I want to share. And let me go to a example. Okay. We have a
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so I just highlighted a few points, and so from it's about 2 pages, and actually that was one review I wrote for MLR and some years ago. So basically, I usually structure my review on 3 things. One is the theory part, one is the method part, and one is the context part. So the theory part, I had some questions about the theory and about how the author claim their contribution. And so sometimes the author may miss some studies in the literature, and lots of times as the authors tend to say, okay, we do this because nobody has done that. Usually that's a not very strong way to frame the contribution. And it's probably more penetrating to say, okay, what exactly is the problem? What exactly is the controversy, and how you could help solve the problem? And then I try to find that there is a promising opportunity for the paper to move forward. And then I move on to suggest the author to pay more attention to the Chinese institutional context, and saying that hypothesis 2 probably is the most interesting part of the paper, and suggest the author to pay more attention to that. And then I say that some of the hypothesis probably is not necessary, which dilutes the focus of the study. That is as I mentioned earlier, that is sometimes the authors, they present the hypothesis for the sake of presenting them, because there's many papers have been doing that in that way. For example, there is the Chinese marketization index. Lots of papers use that as a moderator. So I sometimes I want to know whether that is still really add strong novelty to the paper. So, and then I don't want to go through the method part. I have some comments there. And then I ask the author to, because the author talk about the People's Congress, and I also ask them to whether they could test the effect of the Chinese Political Consultative Conference. So that is about the context. And so because I feel based on the storyline, if you only test People's Congress, probably it's not enough. So that's the contextual inaccuracy. So
Dali, there's a quick request to for you to enlarge the slide. Maybe just to shift it up, from the audience. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Is that good enough? Sorry. Actually, I have finished my presentation. Yeah,
no, that looks fine. That looks okay to me. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So basically that's what I want to say. Yeah. And thank you very much.
Okay, thanks so much, Professor Dali Ma. I really like his perspective on how the reviewer and the editor work as a team, right? So the reviewer are helping, assisting the editor to make decision and then find those diamond in the rough. Okay, so I really like that the part about the presentation. Okay, last but not least, let's have Professor Milo Wang to talk about his sharing about the review quality.
Thank you so much, Candice, for hosting the event. And I really learned a lot from the 3 prestigious scholars ahead of me. I think Kenneth, Cecilia, and Dali already shared a lot of insights that I prepared as well. So I wouldn't, repeat all those interesting and important parts. And unlike the 3 ahead of me sharing those more exemplar kind of comments, what I did somewhat differently is trying to share and comment on a example, like just an example of a regular reviewer's comments that we would expect as a senior editor. So maybe that could, give us some somewhat different insights, and I wouldn't repeat anything, so that we can probably have more time for the audience to ask questions and make the session more interactive. So that's the goal.
Yeah, thanks, Milo. Right. Sorry, the 4th one is the hardest.
or the easiest. So anyway, so this is a recent kind of paper I handled at an MOR. I'm also a senior editor at an MOR, but less experienced. I started my job earlier this year. Really happy to be involved, and I handle quite a lot of qualitative submissions, and also, papers on institutional theory, social evaluation, which are generally aligned with my research interests. So here is a kind of what I think a typical review out of the comments from a reviewer from MOR. So I'm trying to enlarge it so that people can you see this clearly? Awesome.
I think it's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's about 2 and 3 pages. So I think 2 to 3 pages is a sweet spot. I totally agree with Cecilia. If you write like almost 2 pages or almost 3 pages, that's fine. But I think 2 to 3 pages is a reasonable ask. It's a reasonable task as well for reviewers. So this is also like 2 to 3 pages, 12 font, so as you can see, it tries to break down the review comments based on the sections of the paper, theoretical concerns, that's more on theory part, and then the findings and some other concerns. So let me share with you my perspective and my kind of a reaction as an editor, and what parts I think are really helpful and good, whereas other parts less so. So for example, to start with the introductory paragraph, this is always nice, for the reviewer to first acknowledge the good things that's been done, right? Whether this context is novel or the theory context fit is okay, whether the methodology is rigorously implemented. So I think it would be nice to at least acknowledge all the hard work and the good things that authors already provided through the paper. So I kind of bolded this sentence. I think this is always helpful. It also helps the editor to kind of pinpoint the things that we should, applaud for the authors. And then it starts with the theoretical concerns. So that's kind of aligned with what Dali and Cecilia said early on, kind of a section by section, the reviewers can comment on the paper, and starting with the most important and most significant or the worst kind of points, so that the editors would receive a clear signal that which part I should really focus, which part I should really pay attention to. So here, I think the reviewer did a really good job. You can see the first page, basically, this reviewer really had a deep dive into the theoretical perspective that the paper adopts. So it's sense making this in this case. So I use different color to show, the yellow highlights basically are the things around the weakness. So where it goes wrong, what's the weakness of the paper, right? And that's kind of helped me as an editor to quickly, capture the things that a paper might not do justice. The red part, the red, fonts are the parts where the reviewer tries their best to make suggestions, to be helpful, to be constructive. I think all three of you already mentioned that as editors, we really appreciate constructive comments and constructive tunes. I think Dali had a kind of a lot of experience. He shared that, there sometimes could be really critical ones, whereas others being too friendly. So in my limited experience, I always receive more critical. I've never seen any friendly comments or too friendly comments so far. I don't know whether it's too hot during the summer or other things going on regarding the tenure pressure, but really, as an editor, most of the time, I receive either fair or too critical comments from the reviewers. But I would really encourage any future reviewers to be more constructive. It doesn't have to be very friendly, but it has to be constructive. So the red parts here, if you put your emphasis on something, you are supposed to discuss or you're supposed to do something. So that's a way to be constructive, telling the author as well as the editor what should be done but hasn't been done yet. Right? So here, again, my suggestion is blah, blah, blah. So all of those things are kind of a signaling that the reviewer is trying to should be helpful instead of just being critical. The worst comments I would ever seen would be the ones that saying, this doesn't have any novelty or this is not right without any justifications of their negative comments. So this is kind of highly aligned with what the three of you already shared. In the second paragraph, again, the reviewer said, you've misunderstood the meaning of enactment in this context. So theoretically or conceptually, you're making something wrong. So here's why. Let me tell you by giving you some references, some definitions, and also the suggestions from the literature. So it's always nice to use some examples like here, to use some references here, to help the reviewer, help the editor to kind of capture the main points that the reviewer is trying to make, and also to help the authors to further improve their articles by using specific references to pinpoint the specific literatures they should be conversed with. So I think this is really helpful. And also the next paragraph, it's kind of a elaboration of why you are doing wrong and how you can make it better. So I think this kind of elaboration of major points are really helpful for everybody. So going next to the second paragraph, so this is where I think the reviewer can do better. I can understand sometimes when, as a reviewer, you kind of wrote 2 pages, spend maybe 3 hours reading the paper, spending another 3 hours writing a draft of the comments, you're tired. So it's fully understandable when you are, into your 3rd pages or the second half of your review comments, you were kind of, okay, I've said a lot. Right? I had a problem, but I'm kind of fatigued. I don't want to spend another 3 hours writing a perfect comments. This is totally understandable. But again, I would encourage reviewers, at least for the first round, try your best to articulate all the things that you captured. There is it's a kind of a psychologically understandable when you see something obvious, you might assume the other reviewers might capture that as well. So maybe I don't need to write a very elaborative comments for this particular comment, but not necessarily. You know, the reviewers could be quite diverse, and as editors, sometimes we will choose reviewers based on their different expertise. So I would really encourage reviewers to, you know, read through the paper, pick upon anything that you think are worth mentioning, worth discussing, worth elaborating, because all those elaboration and the specific comments and the suggestions can be really helpful. So like one here, I would really appreciate more elaboration of how the paper is not doing sufficiently to deal with institutional logics. But the reviewer somewhat, you know, stopped after a short paragraph. I can see where he or she is going, but I just would appreciate more specific suggestions for how, you know, the authors can do better. So this is something I think, you know, improvements can be made. And again, now you look at the second comments, it's basically other concerns. So the review decided to say, here's a theoretical major problems, and all the other concerns are, you know, somewhat, you know, seemingly minor. I think Cecilia made a good point. For editors, we would hope that you start with like 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 major points, and then minor points, you know, subsequently. But here I had to kind of go through those other concerns to pick up on the relatively more important ones. For example, the findings really, if you look through, I realized that the reviewer really wants to make findings another major points, but the structure of the comments can somewhat be misleading to both the editor and reviewers, thinking that maybe the findings is a minor comments, but in this case, it's not a minor comments. So this is another kind of a very, you know, specific, you know, tiny bit, but it can be really helpful if you structure your comments based on the importance of the points. So here's another thing I would suggest that the reviewers can improve for this particular one. Okay, so this is a kind of example, right? A few things I want to highlight in addition to all the insights that I shared before me. The first one is the tone, right? How you can improve your tone. So one thing, like a tip I would share with all of the audience, as I would do when I was as a student, as a trainee reviewer. So every time I wrote up my comments and you know, review assignments, I would sit on it for at least a day or two. I would reread it after a day or two, and just to look at my tone, whether I can change the sentence. Is this paragraph a bit too critical, right? So the second reading is really to help me to be a better person, to share my comments without changing my content, but making my tone more constructive and making my kind of content more, I would say, user-friendly, so that they wouldn't just see the criticism, but see that I'm trying to help. So I would encourage you, if you're a like fast and maybe a short-tempered person, sit on your comments, you know, wait for a day or two and revise it to be more constructive. And the second kind of a tip I would really want to share is that because I handle a lot of qualitative papers, and for qualitative papers, the convergence among the 3 reviewers could be even harder than for quantitative papers. So for the first round, I would really encourage, you know, all the reviewers to be open-minded, right? Because you could be coming from different angles, theoretically or methodologically. But I would really encourage all the reviewers to be open-minded. So for editors, we can say these are suggestions, right? These are requests, these are possibilities instead of requirements or the only approaches. So I think that could be really helpful as well. And the third is really, you know, the methods. I think a lot of the I would say maybe senior reviewers wanted to focus on the theory part. I think that's totally fine. But to be honest, I think a lot of the senior authors are also the method experts. And for qualitative papers, especially, the methodology is almost as important as the findings, as the other parts of the paper, because it's more explorative, right? So the theory could change largely if your methods were not implemented correctly. And for methodological approaches, I would really appreciate reviewers to spend more time commenting, reading through, instead of just seeing that as an add-on or assuming the methods are okay. So these are kind of my 3 additional points I want to add. And I really hope to, you know, leave more time for interaction. I hope that's fine, Kenneth.
Yeah. Sounds perfect. Thanks so much, Milo, for providing a more perspective from the qualitative type of research, and also I think Milo is probably closer to the student days compared to us. So I think that also speak to a large portion of the audience here. Okay, so we are here to take some questions. Okay, for you, all of us panelists, and so let me start with the first one. There's so far only 1 or 2 questions. Okay, so the first one from JTL, okay, 2008. Would you conduct reviews of different lengths depending on the quality of the paper, such that for papers that I suggest to reject may demand less of my time to conduct a relatively shorter review compared with paper with better quality for revisions? Okay, any takers for this? Okay, so maybe I'll just start quickly. Usually I would, I would not, right? So I would usually keep it to, I mean, of course, there are some longer paper, there are shorter papers, there are some more condensed papers, there are some paper with more straightforward ideas. But I don't know, I tend to keep my review of, almost the same length, or depending on the paper, right? So I focus on whether there are issues to address, and then where critical issues that I should raise in a comment, rather than thinking about, quality of the paper. So because you will not know, right, beforehand, the quality of paper. So at the end of the day, I think my review end up, I think not too much difference in the length. Usually 6-8 major points following some of the great guidelines that the other panelists have provided. Okay, Dali?
Yeah, I think I generally I would still suggest that you have at least 1 page, for 2 reasons. One is, so if you really don't want to see the paper get published, you'd better tell us why. Because if you just write a short paragraph saying the paper has problem and it should be rejected, but if another reviewer that likes the paper and write a pretty lengthy review, and that actually for the editor, maybe sometimes we need to we may give more weight to that more detailed review. So that is something that you need to be mindful of. Second is, generally, I don't think you will get really bad quality papers, because the editor-in-chief would reject some papers. Deputy editor would reject some papers, and senior editors will reject some papers. In general, I don't send a paper to the reviewer if I don't think the paper has any promise. So it has to have something useful, meaningful before I send it out. Sometimes if I don't see that, or if I think the paper has too many problems, I would just reject the paper. And so far, the editor-in-chief and the deputy editors, they have all agreed with my decision on that, in that regard.
Right. Okay, by the way, you can, if you want, you're more comfortable, you can type in Chinese, okay? And then we can, of course, we can reply in English. Okay, well, so compared to the last session, we had a lot of questions, but so far I don't think we have another question. Anyone else with a question? Okay, well, okay. So then maybe I'll take this opportunity to ask one myself. As editors yourself, and maybe as of course reviewers, what do you think are the some of the key things that you really do not want to see in a review, or anything that the reviewer should not do, right? I think you highlighted a few, right, in your sharing, but are there any things that you really think the reviewer shouldn't do in the review process, which will make your job easier, of course, as editors?
I think I'll jump in.
Yeah, Milo.
Sure. I think we all said as editors we appreciate more consistent
Yeah.
kind of gestures or comments,
Yeah.
That means that you don't write a super friendly comments and then click rejection. So I think that's one way. But the other thing I want to add is that I really hope not seeing is that during the whole process, because for different rounds, the comments are expected in different ways. So what I would really appreciate is during the first round is all very positive, and after the authors making the efforts trying to resolve the issues, and then the second round, it became the whole different other issues. So this is a different way of inconsistency, and for editors, it's a headache.
Yeah.
And I think Cecilia mentioned early on that if it's a 10-page comments, it's intimidating. And for the first round, I would still think if I were in the case, I mean, I'm still trying to get my tenure, so I will still try. But if after resolving 10 pages of comments, I got another 10 pages, that's not intimidating. That's just not welcoming anymore. So I guess this is for editors an important part to communicate with the reviewers so that they understand. It's not an endless process. It's supposed to be progressing over time. And then nowadays, given the time pressure for a lot of junior authors, it's important to make the paper, decided after 2 to 3 rounds.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the things I would expect, as an editor.
Thanks, Milo. I really like that point. To be consistent, not only within that first round review, but throughout the different rounds, right? So I think it's okay to raise new questions, but I think in general, it should be consistent with the major issue you lay out in the first round, right? As a reviewer, right? It shouldn't be, you're doing A and then suddenly you want the author to reframe it in an entirely different way in the second round. And then you add, 3 more, data requests and to collect new stuff in the second round. So I think that's also a little bit unfair, right? To the author. It should be consistent with your major comments in the first round in general. Okay. Okay, excellent. Okay, so I think now please.
Sorry, if I can just add two more points. One is so every paper typically for the initial submission to maybe final acceptance, it would take easily 2 or 3 years. So it would not be surprising to me to see some major paper developments or new publications that happens to share the same topics and theoretical contributions as yours, moving into the second, third round or later rounds. So at this stage, the reviewer may be able to bring out and raise attentions to the editor and the authors, which he or she was not able to do in the initial round. But I totally agree with what Milo and Kenneth, you as well, has mentioned the importance of a consistency. So so maybe my suggestion is to keep it transparent, but at the same time manage expectations as well, because this is indeed the later rounds. Instead of using that as a reason to reject a paper, maybe think about what then can we do to still make this a useful or valuable contribution to the field. And the second thing I want to add on is about communication. I think the reason why I say this today, I look at my editor window system. I have 3 papers where reviewers were overdue. So I know this is a busy season, everybody was traveling, but then luckily these reviewers write to me and explaining that they would need 1 more week or 2 more weeks. But then, for those who agree for you, it will be really important to keep the communication open and let us know if things happen so that we can budget a time accordingly. And there's that.
Yeah, excellent points. I think I just want to add one thing. I think we really don't want to see as editor is that the reviewer asked for 5 weeks, and after 5 weeks, the reviewer said, I'm really sorry, I couldn't do it anymore because of a family emergency. Well, I sympathize with the family emergency. It would be great if the reviewer can let editor know earlier in advance, so we can try to find a substitute reviewer and probably not into the 5th week and suddenly said you can't do it anymore. I think that would be a little tough on the authors, because that means the whole review process will drag on for at least another several weeks. Okay, so I think we now have a few questions. Let me try to take them in order that they are given in the comment section. Alice Y, thank you for sharing. I have a quick question about theoretical contributions. Do you think theoretical contributions are journal specific? That's one, some theoretical contribution are valued in A journal, but not in B journal. Some theoretical contributions mentioned in A journal, but can appear again in B journal. Okay. Any thoughts on that?
Personally, I don't make that distinction. Yeah,
Okay.
when I read the paper, I always look for something novel. Honestly, some of the papers I accepted, I think they could possibly go to maybe the so-called even top journal. But I feel that MLR was lucky to have these papers. And there were papers that sometimes one reviewer may tell me, okay, I reviewed this paper multiple times for top journals. So but I still don't see the novelty, so I still have to reject it. So, and yeah.
Okay, thanks, Dali. I think MOR, one of the key mission is to advance research in the Chinese context or comparative context, right? So I think that's probably the one of the differentiation point of MOR versus a maybe broader journal like AMJ, which takes all kinds of journal, or even SMJ. And I'm with Dali on this. I think I don't make that distinction across journals. I think it's a good contribution. But of course, in the case of MOR, it has to relate to the Chinese context in some way, right? One way or another. Okay. Okay. Yeah, please, Cecilia.
I would just add that some journals do have their preferences. In addition to what Kenneth has mentioned about MOR, some other journals such as JBV or ETP, they're very entrepreneurship topic focused. So the theoretical contribution wise, they may expect more to contribute to the entrepreneurship literature other than others. For instance, JIPS for another example. So it has to be a study about cross-border investments or expansions, and they expect you to talk about extensively contribution. So you may want to consider and understand a little bit the expectations of different journals as a reviewer and also as an author as well.
Yeah. Milo? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Kenneth said on the other side, kind of if it's because I study China and I'm publishing more kind of general management journals, and in both cases at AMJ or ASQ, it took me more time to justify China as a theoretical important context. So that's kind of different from MOR, and also different from studying US context and trying to publish in AMJ or ASQ.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely encourage this. Did not come up here right now, but I encourage the potential reviewers to look at the journal websites. They always have tips about reviewing, what to look out for the specific journal. Cecilia and Milo made very good points. Of course, I would read some recent papers from these journals and then look at the objectives of the journal to see whether they are more entrepreneurship focused. Research policy could be a bit more innovation, right? So if you don't talk about innovation or innovation sort of theory or advancement, then it's very hard to get published in research policy, right? For example, right? So read the recent papers from the journal, look at the websites where there's a lot of information for potential reviewers. Even for our AACMR conferences, we have websites that provides information for potential reviewers. Okay, so I think those are very helpful places to go to for especially for new reviewers. Okay, so the next question, talking about managing the journal submission, would you give some advice to late-stage PhDs, like how many projects in different stages, or how to manage the time better? Okay, so this goes a little bit beyond the reviewing, but I think we are happy to provide some advice for late-stage PhDs. Any takers?
Well, since I was closer to late-stage PhDs, I'm happy to kick off. So I was on the market in 2020. So if I remember correctly, on my CV, I have one publication, one R&R, and maybe one on the review. So I think that was regarded a pretty good pipeline.
Really good, yeah.
So now, as a junior faculty, sitting on hiring committee for a couple of times in the past several years, so I think that kind of criteria is still valid. So as a late stage student, I would really encourage you to make a plan for the review kind of a process, because usually it's 3 months. In some journals, it's even longer, but I think a lot of top journals are trying to be more timely these days. But again, you can't be sure about the summer. It's always hectic for everybody. So I think when I was on the market, I already anticipated that. So I submitted my last kind of submission in May, but still I got the letter back in like late September. So that was like 4.5 months. So yeah, I would really encourage you to manage your pipeline, thinking about how much time it might require for you to get a decision back.
Yeah, so definitely think about the pipeline, plan your time, as many of the panelists, Cecilia, Milo have mentioned, it takes time, right? So 2-3 years, if you are all, successful and smooth, from first submission to publication in a leading journal, right? So that's a very typical timeline. Usually it's a bit longer than 2 years. So do plan it well in your PhD stage. Okay, so I think we have another question. So there's quite a few. So there's one from Jackson in Chinese. So 请问老师请教一个关于 reviewer 意见的问题，如果 reviewer 的 comments 都是关于 theory 的，没有涉及 empirics， 但是给了 R&R， 请问老师这释放了什么信息？是否如何解读这些 comments？ 是否意味文章大概率会被拒？谢谢。So any takers? So basically it's about if the comments are all about theory without empirics, does it mean? Yeah. Okay.
I've never received, I assume this is an empirical paper with empirical testing, but I've never received any reviews that comes without comments on empirical. So I will interpret it as a good news. It means that reviewers, I guess, both reviewers are happy with your empirical analysis. And I would just focus on the theory and focus on the comments that relate to the theory. I won't have the conclusions that the paper is more likely to be rejected. I won't. So as long as you receive an invitation to revise, that's the good news. So moving forward, just focus on comments and get it done.
Absolutely. I don't think I have in my many years I don't think I've received only comments on theory without empirical changes. But again, I think I will see that as a good news. That means the reviewer are somewhat, quite happy about the empirics. Okay, as Cecilia said. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next question. In the interest of time, okay, as a young researcher, this is from Yan Peng. I have received some review invitation from lower quality journals. Okay, I still take this as opportunity to learn, but sometimes the review papers do shower low quality. Okay, less rigid method. You mean probably less rigorous method, poorer theoretical basis. As senior researchers, would you suggest us to review for these journals? Any thoughts? Okay, I'll go first. I'll think about the journal that I want to send my paper to and I want to publish in. So because I think it's only fair, right? So if I send my paper to a journal, I also review for the journal, or the request comes in, usually I'll take them. Okay. There are, of course, many journals out there, and we all have limited amount of time. We can't review for all the journals, right? So there are journals that I remotely that's not in my area, or journal that I don't think I would submit to. And then if I have a time limit, then I will probably turn down some requests from those journals. Again, it's hard to say which journal are higher quality, low. I mean, you can look at the ranking of the journals, but I will start from where I tend to want to publish in, I want to contribute a conversation in, and then I want to, help those journals as well. But, as reality is that we do have to turn down some journals. Okay, so that's my take.
And also sometimes it's about match as well. So if the invitation for the papers happens to cover the same topics that you're interested in, that would be a good reason. Otherwise, that would be a good reason to say no as well.
Okay, great. So let me move on to the next question from Alice Y. I also have a question about empirical parts. As editors and reviewers, how do you think the data transparency and replication crisis may have an impact on journal submissions? I saw ASQ has updated their data policy, data reporting policy. Yep. that's happening across the management field now. Yeah, so any takers? Dali?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to be transparent about the data, etc. And I don't see it as an issue. And so I haven't run into that. And my personal experience is at one time when I reviewed for American Sociological Review, I noticed an ethical issue by a very kind of high status author. And I wrote to the editor, pointed out that issue, and they rejected the paper. In a way, I feel I saved the reputation of that senior author. If the paper gets published, it could be a big damage for his reputation.
Yeah, I mean, journals still sometimes make mistakes, right? So they are retractions, right? So sometimes we retract their papers. But I think in general, whether it's in sociology, in management, strategy, innovation, entrepreneurship, I think we are moving towards more data transparency, more replication type of study. And then the journals now always ask, at least the leading ones, ask you to provide your data. If not, you have to justify why you cannot provide the data, what part of the data you have used or have not used for other journals, submissions, papers, and so on, right? So I think in general, I think it's a good thing for the field as a whole. I think we have to learn the different policy from different journals. And then I think as a whole, I think it's good for the authors, it's good for the editors as well as for the journals. That's in general. That's what I think.
I would like to agree with that. I think Dali make a really good point.
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing. I wouldn't see that as a crisis in general. And I think for good research and good researchers, they've been doing this for a long time. It's just not formalized or institutionalized in this way. So I'm kind of in this process of moving towards more formal rules for data transparencies. For example, when I was publishing my AMJ as a student, my response letter is like 20, 30 pages long, showing a lot of data. But in the end, because the length limitation, I can't put them into the paper. So it became not wasted, but just shelved, right, in my computer and in the reviewer's computer. But for ASQ, because it's in the process of doing that, in the end, I think the editor and the reviewers asked me to put most of my responses into appendix. So I have a paper, maybe like 40 pages, another like 20 pages of appendix online. I think that's good, right? It shows a lot of the outcomes or the statements I'm making in the paper is actually supported by the data. Instead of just saying, well, I can show that it by request, right? We actually got those data and happy to share it online.
Great. Yeah, I think in general, that's a healthy thing. Economics journal have been doing that for a long time, right? So I think we are institutionalizing some of this now. Okay, so let me move on to the next question in the interest of time. From Zeyu Li, I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Thank you for your intriguing sharing. It's a pleasure, of course, from all of us. I desire to ask a question regarding publishing choice. For some hybrid journals, whether the manuscript will be given more publishing opportunity if the author choose to publish the manuscript by open access, especially during a second round of revision. How do you think that based on editor position? Okay, so let me give a quick reply. Based on my experience, whether you decide to publish open access or not, which means usually you have to pay, right? A couple of $1,000 usually. It shouldn't affect, right? It shouldn't affect your chance of getting published by the journal. It shouldn't, right? So in my experience. Okay. Anyone else have? We're good? Okay. Yeah, agree? Okay. All right. So next question from Jackson. 请问老师们请教一个关于 reviewer 意见的问题。Oh, okay, so we answered that already. Okay, great. Okay. All right. So next question. All right. So from Li Yuran. Okay. 老师们好，请问两位 reviewer 都给了 major revision editor 还是 reject 了 ？OK， 认为作者无法回复这些问题，但是作者认为是可以解决的。这种情况是有其他原因吗 ？Yeah, difficult, not an easy one. Any thoughts?
I don't know. Sometimes you may misread the reviewer's comments. You may think it is the major revision, and actually the reviewer may say that it is a rejection. So unless the editor clearly says that, okay, both reviewers give you a major revision suggestion, and maybe that's a different case. I personally, if two reviewers recommended major revision, I wouldn't reject the paper. Yeah, that's I still sometimes, even though I think I would rather reject the paper, but I still want to give the author another chance.
Yeah, I would like to echo Dali's point. I think usually if there's two major revisions, recommendations from the reviewers, the editor would be happy to give another chance to revision. So this go back to our earlier discussion about the importance of having a consistent review, such that the writing that is supposed to be viewed by the author needs to be consistent with your recommendations to the editor. In this case, as Dali mentioned, it's very likely that if they are or even misleadingly encouraging to the author, but then in the box where it's confidential to the editors, they absolutely hate the paper. And there's another possibility is that the editors don't really like the comments by the two reviewers. So it could be that two reviewers just simply write half of a page comments, which really is not with a good quality. So they're not pinpointing the major limitations that the editor is able to see. So in this case, that might explain why the rejection as well. I can't really answer this question, but I doubt that the reviewer will actually write this is a major revision decision in their referee letter. So there may be some miscommunication here.
Yeah. So I agree with both Cecilia and Dali. So on the flip side, I do notice sometimes when editor have to reject a paper, they sometimes will cite, or the editor tend to cite, okay, so both reviewer have also given a rejection decision, or both reviewer have recommended not to proceed with the paper. So sometimes editor will say that very in a transparent manner, so that we are all on the same page. But very rarely the editor will say, okay, so both have given a major revision. Unlikely. So there's a bit of a information asymmetry there, right? So there's a confidential comment to the editor. So again, alignment with consistency for your reviewer comments, and so you will make the editor's job easier. But of course, there are sometimes reasons the editor have to reject a paper, and because they are thinking about whether there's a clear path forward for the article, sometimes the editors have to make that call, right, based on the reviewer recommendation. In the case of two major revision, personally, I also tend to give the paper another opportunity to revise. Okay, all right. So I think we are, about time, right? It's 10:32 a.m. based on my clock. So this is thank you again, right? So again, round applause for our very great panelists for your time and your great contributions. I'm hoping that all the audience and the faculty and the students out there are benefiting from this session, and please do help us review for MOR, AACMR, and other journals that you think you will want to contribute to and have a conversation with. And so please do help us to review. And also we believe we have another session on the reviewing quality. And then if you have more questions, do join that session. Okay, we look forward to sharing more insights with you in that session. Okay, all right. Okay, thank you very much. I think IACMR have put in a link there. If you want to register for a reviewer, please go to that link. Okay, thanks again to the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.